Welcome to the Understanding Jesus segment of the Campus Salt Show. Jesus of Nazareth is one of the most influential and important people in all human history. So I believe there's great value in gaining an accurate understanding of his life and teaching. Personally, I believe there's an even more important reason to understand him. I believe he was and is who he and his followers claimed he was. But I'm going to try to stay out of the way and focus on helping you understand what he said and did, and let you judge for yourself. Many of the things that you hear about Jesus in popular culture, sometimes even in churches, are basically just extrapolations from a concept like grace or forgiveness. That's not what we're going to do here. We want to give you a clear understanding of Jesus of Nazareth, what he actually said and did, what he was actually all about. We're going to do this by working from the source documents, and as best as we can, understanding them in light of their historic and literary context. First, we're going to look at what source documents are available. Then we'll consider what it means to understand them in their historic and literary context. Finally, we'll discuss the choice of which document to focus on for the remainder of this series. So, first, the source documents. The two best non-Christian source documents are from a Romano-Jewish historian named Josephus and a Roman historian named Tacitus. Unfortunately, these documents only include brief references about Jesus, so they don't tell us much. They tell us that he received the death penalty, a Roman crucifixion, by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. The documents that tell us more, the only detailed source documents that we have, dating back to the first century, are written by Christians. These are commonly known as the four Gospels. They're referred to as the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke, and the Gospel according to John, or abbreviated as simply Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, all historians are biased to some degree, but these documents are clearly biased in a pro-Jesus direction, since they were written by those who believed that Jesus was Israel's promised Messiah. Now, some scholars have attempted to remove the bias, to guess at what Jesus originally said or meant by starting from these Christian documents and removing material that they believe is unlikely to have been authentic to Jesus. Their assumption is that the early Christian community added to or misconstrued what Jesus said or did, that they put words in his mouth to promote their favorite teachings or beliefs. Personally, I think it's unlikely that Jesus' immediate followers substantially altered or misconstrued what Jesus said and did in these documents, since they are early, especially the Gospel according to Mark, which was written just a few decades after Jesus' crucifixion. Now, at this time, Jesus' disciples and most of his family would have still been active in the Christian community at that time. However, even if they did misconstrue what Jesus actually said and did, these are the only detailed source documents that we have. The alternative is to simply guess at what we think Jesus may have said and done. And even if you want to do that, I think there's still value in understanding Jesus as he is presented in the four Gospels. Now let's talk about the historic and literary context. The Gospel accounts need to be understood in their context. It's natural to read a document as if it were written within the last decade, or at least the last century. If you read about a man in downtown Seattle forming a group of 12 followers who are all male and all the same race, you might be right to wonder if he's sexist and racist. But if you understand Jesus' actions in light of his historic context, the ancient Middle Eastern culture he lived in, you'll see that the way he treated outsiders, people from other races, and women was shockingly egalitarian and inclusive. But it's not enough to read the Gospels in their historic context. We also need to take into account their literary context. You might think That means the Greco-Roman biographies of the time. And although they do bear many similarities to these biographies, the Gospels do have important differences. In order to accurately understand the Gospels, we have to understand them not simply as a Greco-Roman biography about a teacher with provocative things to say or a life well lived, but rather we have to read them in their true literary context as a sequel to Israel's prophetic writings. This is how the documents present themselves, as we'll see next time in the second episode. Not only as a sequel to Israel's prophetic writings, but as their fulfillment. Now, finally, we need to decide which of these four gospel accounts we're going to focus on in this series. As we mentioned earlier, there's four: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And given time constraints, we need to pick one to focus on. Now, of the four, Mark was written first. Matthew and Luke include virtually everything that's in Mark, but they supplement it in different ways. And they're clearly written to a particular audience. Matthew to a Jewish audience, Luke to a Greco-Roman audience. John is different from the other three. It was written later and has more of a theological and philosophical bent to it. Well, to me, the choice is clear, but maybe that's because Mark is my favorite. But still, I think there are some good reasons to focus on the Gospel according to Mark. It's not only the earliest of the four Gospels, it's also the shortest, has the core message that all four Gospels contain. And it's full of action. And I like that it has the themes of suffering and persecution woven throughout it. Many scholars believe it was written during the early Roman persecution of Christians, and that the content is mostly the Apostle Peter's personal memoirs, recorded and edited by Mark. Now, tradition has it that Peter was crucified in Rome in AD 64. I like to think that the abrupt ending of Mark may have been due to Peter and Mark rushing to finish the manuscript, and Peter's involvement being cut short due to his crucifixion. Now, we've discussed the source documents, we've talked about understanding them in their historic and literary context, and we've talked about the choice of which document to focus on. So in the next episode, we'll dive in to the beginning of the Gospel according to Mark.